On today's episode, we're going to talk the coronavirus. We have special guest, Naturopathic Doctor, and a financial advisor to help us understand what's going on.
We're here to talk about bread, lettuce, cheese, dead presidents, green.
It's just money, man. It's just money.
Today we have Dr. Rues with us. She's a naturopathic doctor with Kansas City Integrative Health. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you'd like, give us a little background for yourself, and we'll jump into the coronavirus after that.
I am a naturopathic doctor. I have owned and I've been practicing in the Kansas City area for over 5 years at this point. Prior to that, I went to medical school, naturopathic medical school in Phoenix, Arizona. And before that, I had my undergrad degrees in molecular biology and psychology from Rutgers University here. So my practice primarily focuses on women's health and fertility, which is interesting in the light of coronavirus because I've been quite nervous for my pregnant and fertility-seeking patients during this whole process.
I imagine they've been reaching out then?
Yes, in multitudes.
Yes. Your expertise, medicine, what do you know? What do we know right now?
With the coronavirus, with COVID-19, right, because coronavirus is a family of viruses, and this is a specific strain of coronavirus, hence why it has its own name. This COVID-19 is completely unknown. I mean, the scariest part about coronavirus, or COVID-19, which I will use interchangeably, is that we just have no idea what to expect. It's less than 6 months old in terms of a virus. And what is probably scariest is we don't know how it affects people short term as much. And then in terms of long term, what are the long term ramifications? What happens if it mutates and comes around again? There's a lot of unknown aspects. And once we have more time, I think things will probably slow down. And really the knowledge of what we know will help so much in terms of not only small business, but medicine and probably even the economy.
So I know the three of us were talking. One of our questions we kind of have is like, are people or are people not overreacting? Kind of what's your perspective?
I think it's better to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. I'm hoping that every hysterical media outpost is completely and totally wrong. But some of the news that comes out of China and more importantly, and recently Italy is pretty scary. And not so much that the death rate is high. The death rate is relatively low. It's 3%, give or take, depending on what math you use and how many people are testing. That is about 3 to 100 times higher than the flu virus, which is a pretty wide range because we just don't know. The more worrisome aspect is that generally in Italy, about 10% of patients are needing ICU treatments. Doesn't matter of age. So if you look at it from that perspective, the massive amount of ventilators and CPAPs and other types of and BiPAPs that people need in order to survive this is independent of age for the most part. And we don't have enough supplies in the US or in the world if everyone gets this tomorrow.
So this is where kind of we've seen people talking more about we could have a higher or lower fatality rate practically just based on how many people get sick at the same time.
Correct.
Which is why they're canceling everything.
Yes.
So I think sometimes that's been lost in the media so far as they're not canceling everything because it's so deadly. They're canceling
Correct.
everything because it can be deadly if we don't have enough people to care for the people who get sick.
Yeah, people and equipment.
Yeah.
Just on a basic level, how does a new strand become available?
Well, so from my understanding, and let me preface this that I am not an infectious disease expert. Like I said, the coronavirus, it's a family of viruses that's actually pretty well studied. And I mean, there's a good chance that you have had a coronavirus cold in the past in your life. What happens is it jumped species, and we don't know exactly which species they came from, but it's highly suspected that it came from an exotic species from China. Likely it caused a cold, for example, in this animal. And then when some human consumed it, for some reason, it had the ability to infect that human. And then with that, it has never infected any other human before. So now it's creating this kind of rampage where it's being able to be transmitted human to human.
So do we have like 19 of these? Or
19.
I think somebody told me COVID-19.
I think it's because of 2019.
It's 2019, right?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have, off the top of your head, do you have any idea how many strains that we're aware of? Because obviously
No idea.
They're already saying that there might have been more strains of the COVID-19, and they're still like trying to figure out how many of COVID-19s already exist.
Right. No, there's always a possibility for something to mutate and change. For example, I know that we've been vaccinating cows for coronavirus for tens of decades at this point, but it's not enough of a match to the current COVID that it could just easily transmit into humans because there's so many different types. I mean, if you just consider the influenza, they have 3 types of flu in each year's vaccine because it mutates so quickly over the span of even a year that they're trying to hit what they think is going to be the most likely strains that cause issues. So that's how they approach it, because there's, H1N1, which everyone's heard of, but then you could have, H2N1, there's so many different combinations, and each combination requires a different vaccine. So the same thing with coronavirus, each strain could potentially require a different vaccine.
So what can people be doing right now? I mean, you have your own unique perspective to it as a naturopathic doctor, which I'm sure people are very curious on. We know to wash our hands.
Right.
We know that we don't know how it's transmitting. I mean, the news has been pretty popular. We know they're worried about obviously breathing it in when you're in the room. Mm-hmm. But what are things we can be doing to defend ourselves?
Well, as a disease, it doesn't seem to be generally terrible. It's just statistically, if you're in that 10% or more, then it's going to be pretty unfortunate. But in general, if you are not an at-risk individual, you're younger, you're healthy, there's no pre-existing conditions, it'll probably just be like a flu, like probably one of the worst flus you've ever had, but flu, cough, fever, body aches, maybe mild pneumonia. That's kind of common in even mild cases, but it's not necessarily going to completely disrupt you and your health in your life. So generally, most Americans will be fine. The concern is that if you are exposed to anyone who isn't in that just going to be okay risk, like someone elderly, someone with kidney disease, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, or pregnant. Those are for the most part, the patients that are presenting as the most problematic.
So if you're those patients or any patients, would you be suggesting any supplements? Are you suggesting, what are you telling people when they say, hey, what can I do? Should I be wearing a mask? Should I stay inside?
If you have lung disease at this point, I would say yes. Absolutely. Why not wear a mask? If you are any of the other ones, I would highly consider some sort of self-quarantining, even if it just means minor quarantine. Don't go to major events. Make sure you're staying at least 4 feet away from anyone that could possibly be sick, if not all individuals. Mm-hmm. Trying to minimize contact, not only with individuals, but places that have a high amount of germ contamination. The grocery store, you want to watch out for, carts, just doorknobs, little things along those lines, and making sure that you are taking just preventive precautions so that you aren't exposed to the virus, even if, you happen to be in the same room as the virus.
So it's not an overreaction to be wearing gloves when you go to the grocery store and kind of throw them away on your way out.
I wouldn't say so, not necessarily, but it's just as effective to wash your hands really well. So there's no reason to splurge on gloves. Fascinating, the coronavirus, it's covered in a fatty membrane on the outside. And so the best thing to break up a fatty bilayer is soap. Alcohol, yes, but soap and water is probably the most effective thing that you could do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, that's good to know.
I no longer feel the need to wear gloves. I'd rather wash my hands when I was done anyways.
Yes. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Don't touch your lips. Don't pick your nose. That's kind of a given.
Right.
Yeah,
I've heard obviously from the statistics that particularly kids have not shown much sign of being affected by this. Is that true, or what have you heard about in regards?
Yes, that's absolutely true. So kids have been shown to have mild cases, which kind of present just like a regular common cold coronavirus, which is great on one side because the kids are seemingly not affected. You're not going to necessarily have a high child mortality rate.
I heard there was none even under the age of 9.
I don't know of any documenting cases under the age of 9, correct? And there have been a few cases where a pregnant woman has transmitted it to a newborn, and the newborn was absolutely fine too and had full recovery. So that's great. On the flip side, if they're just having a sniffly nose, you don't think much of it, and you still go to grandma's house.
They're infecting others.
They're infecting others. Mm-hmm.
Some of the fear is more of the unknown. If it doesn't mutate and this is as bad as it gets, that'll almost be a relief.
Yes.
It's the mutation. And then what if it starts targeting other groups of people that kind of creates this additional unknown, like fear factor?
Not just a mutation, but a concern is that you could get it twice, which is not common for most infections because
if it mutates, you could get it twice.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. If it mutates at all. And there are some theories that even without mutation or the minor mutations that people have, or that has already happened, people have gotten it twice, which is causing more probably nervousness, I think, than even the initial infection, partly because if it mutates, there's a worry of something called a cytokine storm, where you have a normal immune reaction the first time you're exposed to it. And even people are being exposed the first time. Some people are having an abnormal reaction the first time, but higher likelihood even with a second exposure where your immune system overreacts and creates inflammation. And anytime you have inflammation, you can have fluid buildup, right? If you say you imagine you sprain your ankle, but this is of course not affecting your ankle. This is affecting the lower lobes of your lungs. So if you have too much inflammation and fluid buildup, you could potentially have a really debilitating or morbid pneumonia.
Interesting. So that's what I've heard people use the term, and I'm like, whatever that means. A storm.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
it's overreaction, overinflammation.
It's like when IT people say a data storm. I'm like, okay, stuff went wrong.
Right.
But that actually makes sense.
Yep.
At what point would you then contact your doctor or make an appointment if you see some symptoms, but they're not severe or
the type of symptoms?
Or the type of symptom?
Yes. I think one of the unfortunate parts of just general response, especially in the U.S., is lack of testing, which kind of worries me because they haven't had clear guidelines from the CDC on who gets tested. And I'm sure you can hear of reports where individuals were possibly exposed, but because they didn't meet the CDC strict guidelines, they weren't tested. And they likely didn't self-quarantine and were continuing to spread this virus. So in general, I think at this point, things are slowly starting to change with testing because I have heard and I've seen reports from major laboratory nationwide corporations showing that they are offering COVID-19 testing. However, I don't see that it's quite widely available. If you have symptoms and they've requested and they've asked doctors to request and communicate to patients that you don't go to your doctor's office, you actually call ahead so that they are prepared for the possibility of putting you in isolation so you're not exposing any other patients further or the medical staff. If you're going to go to the ER, same thing, you call ahead if your symptoms are that bad so that they're aware. Typically, the hard part is the flu was pretty bad this year and it was going around and it still is going around. So it's hard to know if your current symptoms are related to the flu or if they're related to COVID-19. So one of the things that you definitely just want to be conscious of is who have you been around and has anyone else around you been sick, been traveling or anything along those lines. Unfortunately, as community spread becomes more rampant, it'll be hard to tell if you've been exposed and which ones you've been exposed to.
So if I get sick tomorrow and I decide to self-quarantine because that's the right thing to do, how long do I self-quarantine? When symptoms stop, like when can I go back to resuming my life?
The current guidelines, if you're exposed, you're supposed to wait 14 days until you can go back to your life. So that's
14 days is just if I'm exposed.
That's just a
I have
known
no
exposure.
symptoms.
Correct. Known exposure.
Okay, so then I start developing symptoms.
If you develop symptoms, the standard is 14 days, again, from exposure, or 3 days after symptoms subside, whichever's longer.
Okay.
Personally,
minimum 14 days.
Personally, I don't know if that's long enough. They just came out with a study where someone was shedding coronavirus for 36 days.
So in my scenario where I can do a lot of my work from home.
Right.
I mean, maybe I go 21 days.
Yeah.
It's only fair to those who work with me.
Yes. I don't think they have an exact answer, but those are the current guidelines.
Okay. So where's the jump? How do I know like this is just the worst flu I've ever had or go to the ICU?
Right. So the things that are most important to watch for are vital signs as much as you can. Now, I know everyone doesn't have an oxygen saturation monitor at home, but if you happen to have one, that's one of the things you want to watch. If you have the ability to check your fever, that most people have a thermometer at home. So if your fever is dangerously high and not able to maintain...
What's dangerous?
For adults, it's usually around 101, 102. But in kids, it can be higher.
Okay. So that's what I thought. 101, you start to know, hey,
yes,
start watching it.
Especially if your fever is not being suppressed with antipyretics like Tylenol or ibuprofen. And if you're probably the most worrisome sign that you're looking for is shortness of breath. If you feel like you can't catch your breath, you're not breathing, you're not getting enough
lungs.
Yes, you're not getting enough oxygen. The concern is that it's developed into pneumonia and you don't have enough oxygen transfer to the blood.
Okay. So that's why you said an oxygen monitor would be really useful because it's telling you, even if you feel short of breath, you know how much oxygen you're getting.
And a lot of people have blood pressure monitors at home. If you do, that's another good sign to monitor. If it goes way too high or way too low, not a bad idea and you have symptoms of the flu or COVID, then not a bad idea to go in.
So, Dr. Rues, you introduced that you were also a small business owner. How is this going to affect your business? How is this affecting your conversations and plans?
Yes, it's definitely worrisome for multitude of reasons. I feel very blessed with my practice, such that I'm practicing more women's medicine and chronic disease management. So a lot of my visits will likely turn into telemedicine in the near future, which is nice because I have that convenience option. Unfortunately, that does make it so that I cannot do a physical exam or any procedures with a patient. However, they can still have health treatments and care, and we'll be using a lot of use of, drop shipments for anything that has to be shipped to the patient for their treatments. But I've been very blessed to have business guidance so that I have a nice fund that I was hoping to use on renovations or some other business development in the future. But this will likely turn into an emergency reserve fund for any bills that will pop up so that I can maintain and outride this course. Concerns that we have are for patients and patients' care so that they're doing well through this time and they still continue to get the best care. But as the market does possibly downturn and patients become more tight with finances, that may, of course, affect what they're willing to do in terms of their chronic disease management. They can, people could decide to let their, painful periods or diabetes or something just be put on the back burner while they're in isolation and this blows over. So
yeah, that's a great point because it's not really just about can you treat the patients. It's also about will your patients have the funds to pay for the care around the corner too? Because obviously it's affecting a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who hopefully they don't struggle, but there's a concern for a lot of people financially struggling through this.
So advice then for other small business owners, obviously, is this the first time in your 5 years that you've kind of benefited from this experience and feeling of like, oh, this is why this money was set aside. This is the first time that you're like, wow, I still sleep easy now.
Right. Yes, absolutely. As much as you can, minimize expenses and make sure you're saving as much as you can for this wave to ride through. Because even though it's going to be a rough transition, I do think that this will normalize with treatments or a vaccine or just becoming part of the yearly like flu or viruses that come around. I don't think that this wave is going to necessarily last forever. It's just going to be rocky while it does.
I often say this too shall pass.
Yes.
Great advice. Same advice we have for the individual. Always best to have emergency fund of 3 to 6 months.
Yep.
Thank you very much for being
Absolutely.
on the show.
Thank you,
Thank
doctors.
you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was great. Hey, you've got money questions. We've got money answers. It's Just Money Live is coming up. Check out our Facebook page for details. Make sure you don't miss your opportunity to participate. All right, we'll see you then. So we have Jack Kynion III here with us.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us yet again. Apparently, the world wants you here since it's creating a situation where we really feel we need more professional opinions and advice kind of for people. So thanks for getting on the show. And also, if you didn't know, we actually do have scheduled for next week. Jack will be here for It's Just Money Live on Thursday night. So tune in for that if you have any questions for him and send them in ahead of time. In the meantime, Jack, just for new people, small bio, they can always go look you up from there, but make sure they know where to do that.
My name is Jack Kynion III. I'm a friend of the pod. I am a financial advisor and an attorney. I've been doing that for quite some time. So we do wealth management for clients, which is a combination of financial planning and investment management, because we believe that if you have a good plan, the rest of the results can basically take care of themselves. We're based out of Overland Park, Kansas, Legacy Advisory Limited.
What is happening? I mean, let's just be honest here. I don't
It's
even
been
have like
crazy.
a specific question. I just know that I don't think I'd ever seen double-digit losses. Maybe it happened in 08, 09, but I definitely was too young. Yeah, what's going on? And have we ever seen anything like this? Start there.
We have seen this kind of volatility before in the 30s. In 1987, the crash, actually, there was a 25% loss in one day in 1987.
Wow.
Which was, the market just shut down on its own. The older guys say that the market makers just walked away. They couldn't make a market, and they just walked away. That said, yesterday, Thursday, was the worst day for the Dow Jones since 1987.
And that was, what did we end up having?
It was about a 10% loss.
Okay. And that, just to be clear for everybody, that he's talking about then, what is 11th? Is that the 12th?
Today's the 13th.
Today's the 13th?
Mm-hmm.
I've been
Friday
writing
the
checks wrong
13th.
all day.
Oh, gosh. Friday the 13th. What is that? I can't believe the economy is not tanking right now.
Maybe it was all priced in yesterday. They knew the werewolf was coming today, and they're like, well, the werewolf's already here. We can be a little bit more positive. So today, Friday the 13th, markets are actually up. At one point today, the Dow was up about 900 points. What you're seeing is a mixture of things. Partially, it's the uncertainty created by the coronavirus, and then the response by lots of different industry and organization leaders. You know, everybody knows now that March Madness has been canceled. The NBA is delayed its season at least. So is MLS. South by Southwest got canceled, which will have real economic impacts. Right. There's going to be, in some ways, less money spent. And the economy, and the way that we measure the economy, GDP is the most common measurement. That's just an aggregation of everybody's spending over a period of time. So what that means is that in the near future, usually GDP is reported on a quarterly basis. So the next couple of quarters, the GDP numbers are going to be tough. And they're not going to look very good on paper.
So all we have to do is tell people, like, just start spending money, and we fix the problem.
This is going to be the policymakers' response. The Fed's already put about $1.5 trillion into short-term liquidity into the market in order to try to spur some lending.
What does
President
that
Trump,
mean? Like, are they mailing people checks?
Not yet.
I mean, we have that stuff Obama did, so this gets
could
confusing.
happen depending on how deep this gets. I think that there's a fairly good reason to think that it won't be particularly long lasting because everyone's been very proactive the last few weeks, particularly this week, in taking action to be able to try to limit the spread of the virus. Because of that, you could probably get back to business as normal sooner rather than later.
Okay, so the canceling of things isn't actually a sign of like, oh, this is worse. It's almost like if they didn't cancel things, things would have been worse.
Yeah.
It's kind of the reaction from your perspective.
This perspective we're taking is that, if no one did anything and then suddenly, because no one did anything, you had 100 million people infected with it and people were missing work and there was a ton of fear because nobody knew what was going to happen. That would probably be a lot worse from an economic perspective and certainly from an investment perspective. But taking the pain early like this, and I'd like to point out from a non-authoritarian country, it's happening basically organically, whereas a lot of other countries are having to, from the very top down, say, this is how things are going to happen. So I find that just, encouraging for freedom in general.
Cool.
I mean,
Side point.
fear is one hell of a drug.
And it motivates.
It does. And
Pain
it's kind
motivates.
of brought, this country that's been very divided for 4 years together. Everybody's got on the same page.
That's strange. I have not actually stopped at all. I've just kind of gone with the flow, which is your point in general.
Yeah.
Like, this is what we're all doing.
The other thing that people might not know about, because I think that everybody's seen and felt the volatility in the stock market in general. The beginning of this week, Saudi Arabia and Russia had been negotiating over how much oil they were going to produce. So the price of oil is partially set by the cartel, OPEC, of which Saudi Arabia is the de facto head, and then Russia is kind of a partner with OPEC. And because they're two of the largest oil producers in the world, they agree on how much they're going to produce because it affects the price per barrel. Well, basically, Russia wouldn't agree with what Saudi Arabia wanted to do. So Saudi Arabia said fine, and they plunged oil prices by about 50% initially. That's added a ton of volatility this week. So part of it has been the response to the coronavirus and how big is this going to be? How much economic contraction will there be because people aren't doing things? And there's been a ton of added volatility because the oil market just dropped by 50% because of this. We think that that's probably a medium-term to short-term problem. Eventually, oil prices have to get to a more normal level. But there was just a lot of stuff to happen in 1 week.
Right. And what about I've heard issues in the bond market as well. Is that a thing that's happening as well that's interacting with all this, or is that just connected in? Or what's going on there?
I got to be careful here.
Oh, okay. I always ask questions that you're not allowed to answer.
Well, yeah. This is not investment advice. This is just
careful.
the opinion of me. Part of the problem with the bond market is that over the last 10 years, more leverage has been added to the corporate system. So part of what the Fed was trying to do, and part of what the Fed will continue to try to do, is add liquidity to markets so that there isn't the worst problem for the bond market isn't necessarily the fact that some of the high yield, riskier companies might be missing bond payments because they're doing less activity. They don't earn as much money, so there's not as much money available for them to then pay the people that they owe. That stuff will create volatility. It'll create a lot of unease. Asset prices will adjust downward because of that. But that could be somewhat limited if the Fed is successful in keeping enough liquidity in the market itself so that when financings come up, there are actually lenders that are willing to finance, either to refinance debt because things are maturing, or to offer new debt. And so that's going to be a little bit of a quasi government input to see how that works out. The biggest problem there is there's too much debt in corporate America. But that was true before this. The crisis just sort of highlighted it. The way that we've kind of put it, and I think this applies to all of the markets, is that markets were priced to perfection, and then things weren't perfect. So the response is actually fairly reasonable. It's bothersome, but it's not completely unreasonable.
Which is why there's less panic even in your own voice, it's
Sure.
like, this is relatively reasonable.
Sure.
So I want to ask a few questions here. We're already have been way more technical than we've been in any previous episode. But for those of who have this question, I just want to ask it. What is a bond?
Right.
Right? I mean,
A
it's
bond
one of
is
those
just a
things-
form of debt.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that a bond works is
I want to raise money or
sure,
capital.
you have a
for an
company.
investment.
You have this wonderful new podcast company, and you guys need some capital so you can buy better equipment.
We sell bonds.
Right. So then you come to me, an investor, because I have cash and you have a need, and you say, listen, if you give me $100,000, I'll give you $5,000 a year for 10 years.
So it's like
and
a loan.
then it is. And then at the end of the 10 years, I'll give you your $100,000 back
So why don't we call it a loan?
because of those terms.
So it's
So a
just the
loan
way
will
they
amortize.
structure.
So if you took a loan in common parlance, then over the 10 years, by the end of the 10 years, you would probably have already paid principal and interest.
So I don't owe any more. At the end, I'm done.
Right.
I don't then owe you back the money.
Right. Because
So
you've been paying
that's
it along the
big
way.
difference between a bond and
Yep.
a loan.
And so if you think about that difference, because the principal is always outstanding until maturity, which can be 5, 10, 15. Austria, the country, just floated government bonds last year that were 100 years. Principal wasn't due for 100 years.
What?
Yeah, well,
Your grandkids
they're
will
taking
pay this
advantage
principal
of low interest rates
Well.
and the passive revolution.
Maybe you can't call it this, but could we call this an interest-only payment loan with a end date?
Sure, if you wanted to kind of compare
Like
it
to make people
it's
really
like
feel
it's like
they get
interest
it.
only with a balloon payment of 100% of principal.
Okay, so that means
That's what a bond is. And then the way that it functions within the capital markets is that very few bonds are completely paid back out of profits or retired. They can be depending on what happens with interest rates. Most of them are just refinanced into new bonds. Okay. So the
Just
capital is
refinancing, like we
basically
refinance
perpetual.
our
And so as
mortgage.
long as your company still has some metrics that say this is still a decent credit for us, is what they would say, decent reliability that we're going to get our money back, then it just gets refinanced. What to Matt's point earlier about what was going on in the bond market, the fear about going forward is that the credits won't be as good because so many of the corporate issuers of debt have lower credit ratings than they did a decade ago.
So it's just like
and so
my
they're
credit
more on
score.
the edge.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
so
like
they're
me
more on the
personally,
edge.
I need to be able to refinance my house, but because what's going on right now, maybe I miss a payment or something. My credit score goes down. I was just getting ready to refinance my house, but this coronavirus came through, causes the oil if it affected me somehow personally, and it causes my credit score to go down, and it kind of messes up my plan. I mean, that's
or maybe a better way to put it is if the liquidity in the system doesn't sustain itself. So for like the last 5 years, you could pretty much, as an individual, you could roll debt. If you had a credit card debt, you could roll debt to
do another credit card.
another credit card
Another credit
with
card.
a lower interest rate.
As
with
long as you have a good credit
introductory 0%, as long as you had a good credit score, and as long as the banks were lending, right? There are
But what
points in
happens when
time.
they say no?
Right. If they say no for a lot of reasons, they can be regulatory reasons. We don't have the capital to be able to do it, or we don't think the risks are good right now. There can be a lot of different reasons. And there are those structural reasons that I think the real wonky people, when they start thinking about the bond market and what the knock-on effects of all this stuff can be, that's where they start getting just a little bit nervous.
And so this is where you're being careful because you can't make claims, but that's the concept. That's
Yep.
construction, like constructually, that's the problem.
It could be part of the problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
Could be
it's
part of the
a
problem.
piece of what's going on, and that's already was existing in the market.
Already,
Now it's getting
So we got
experiencing a crisis.
oil, we've
And then
got
Yeah, and then
COVID-19, we've
think-
got
think-
bond market,
like we
which is
said,
debt.
Things were priced to perfection. And then there are all these structural issues that
Overinflation.
may be making things more volatile. Because not only was it down 10%, but then it was also down like 8% on Monday. And then it was up like 6% Tuesday. So the up and down, and then it's up 4 or 5% right now. So that volatility is probably being aided by other structural changes in the market. The market isn't as deep as it used to be. There are less shares trading in the general stock market, mostly because corporations have borrowed money, used the money they borrowed to buy back their own stock.
Which always confuses me a little bit, but we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in future episodes.
Sure. It's a way to manufacture stock price and you might not be actually giving real economic growth. But because of that, you have a thinner market, you have just a little bit of crisis. There's just less margin for the market to absorb these things. So it creates more volatility.
So if we I feel like we've gotten a really great 30,000 foot view. Thinking as individuals, should we be thinking about putting money in? Like, what can we say? I will go out if he can't say this and say, you shouldn't just be yanking your money out right now.
Right. That's
we
the big one.
We have a huge tank. If you just start putting money in, that's what we've been talking about in previous episodes about dollar cost averaging. Like, you just keep putting your money in, you're getting it at lower prices. It's going to lower your basis. It's something that you do need to know. This is part of the process
So
of investing.
let's do it like this. Imagine, because we're young, right? And probably don't have much in the market versus someone who's older, who has much of their retirement.
They might be
The nest
retiring
egg.
next year.
Yeah.
This year.
Yeah. A lot of the baby boomers are going into retirement age. I know you can't give specifics or whatever you can give. What, in light of those two scenarios, the young person who has not much in and the older person who's transitioning to retirement, how should they be thinking about what's going on today and maybe thinking about it differently, or do they think about it the same?
They probably think about it both the same and different. Generalized principles are probably going to apply to everybody. Panic's probably not going to be good for anybody. You need to get enough space. If you have something invested now, you need to get enough space from the emotion, either by talking to somebody else or just giving yourself time to be able to look with a clear head what you still own, right? Because everything that you invest in is something that you own. You have to think, you really do need to think about it that way. What is this thing that I own? I know the price just changed, so the money that is represented in my account has changed. Before I do anything, let me see what it is that I still own. And I think that applies to both the young and old alike. I think a lot of young people right now can view this as a buying opportunity, particularly for certain domestic stocks. Got to do good research, got to know what you're getting into. Really, really, really need to be able to assess your risk tolerance. If the volatility that happened this week, which in scale was a bit abnormal, not unheard of, it's happened before, but not the usual thing. If that is making you change what you're doing or giving you way too much anxiety, then you probably need to reassess your risk tolerance, because you're not, there's always going to be a certain amount of volatility in any investment. The future is uncertain, as we've just been reminded. It's really uncertain. So I think that maybe the best advice that I can give is give yourself a little bit of space. Assess your risk tolerance, even with the new information that you just went through this thing. And then from there, decide what you want to do next.
So I was really struggling with at first I was like, oh, this is a great buying opportunity. I am young. I'm going to start dollar cost averaging in. I know the right thing to do here. And if it keeps going down, that's okay, because I'm going to be dollar cost averaging down the whole way. I won't get too aggressive and be too greedy.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to wait, try to time everything and then miss the whatever sequence of events. Now all of a sudden I'm on all the bad things that happens instead and miss all the good. Because we know by history that like missing the good days is very detrimental. So the idea of timing it perfectly is almost impossible.
On an index basis, at least.
So is this bad advice or good advice? I decided not to look. I don't want to know how much I've lost. It should not affect my behavior. I've already decided I was okay with the losses. And so I've kind of decided, as long as I don't look, I can pretend I didn't lose anything. I mean, it's like, I'm the one showing myself. This now can affect my behavior. Is that crazy talk, or is that almost this distance thing you're talking about, where it's a kind of a way to distance yourself? The other thing I've done is I've actually given my money to somebody else to manage so that I don't see it, so that I don't make those mistakes, because they know my risk tolerance. We've talked about it. And now they can more or less do that, because it's like a muscle. And that muscle for me isn't strong enough given this craziness.
I mean, I still want to know where the money goes. Like,
Yeah.
Are people pulling the money out, but at the same time, you're telling people to put more money in? Like, when we should be telling the people who pulled the money out to put that back in? Like, why does it go down and up like it does?
That's a great question.
That they're
Are
like
things less value
there
or
are
is money getting pulled out?
Right. So there are
Right.
simple answers and complex answers to that. Most simply, the market, which is just the aggregation of everybody's thoughts, right?
Sure.
Said GDP is going to go down in the world from what our expectations were. That means there's going to be less profit in these companies, right? They're going to,
So did things get devalued, or did that mean, or did that trigger people to take money out, which is I think part of the
Right.
question.
The prediction. Yeah.
well,
is it just they're worth less?
But the value
Who's
is
valuing this?
But the value is always determined by the buyers and the sellers, right? So the value of the stock is just the aggregation of all the people buying and selling at any given time.
So is it like the
Which
average? 10 people are willing to sell for this price, and 10 people are willing to buy. And when those meet,
Yeah.
that's the value of the stock.
Yeah. It's complicated
Simply.
now because there's a bunch of leverage out there where people are borrowing money in order to do that. So if you do that, then your risk tolerance is a lot lower. But if markets go up 80% of the time, you don't care because you're usually winning until you have these third standard deviation events where you have to cover, which makes the downside more volatile.
So, but for the average person who's not doing those things, which it still affects them because it's
Because they're
you're
invested
talking
in the
about how it
market.
can yo-yo it
Mm-hmm.
way faster than normal would be.
Yep.
But that is how the value is. Like most people have agreed this is the buy and sell price. This is where they met. This is what it's worth. That's the value.
That's basically, well, that's the price at least. And then you decide what you think if that's a good price. And that's where value comes in, right? Where you assign value for yourself or whoever you rely on for that.
Because you got issues, or because the people who own stocks, there's a chunk of them are trying to sell them.
Sure.
And so they're not getting to sell them at what they want to sell them at. They're trying to get it what they can get out of it. And
Right.
so then the buyers are also knowing things are rough, and so they're only willing to pay less for it. So that's why the value goes down.
Because if everybody says, I'm not going to sell this.
That's where the price goes down.
Yeah, the
Price.
price.
Yeah, sorry.
The
price
value
goes-
may or may not go down, but that is why the price
price
goes
goes down.
Because the value could go down, but all of the people who own it refuse to sell it for less. So they set the price because they're the sellers, just nobody will buy it. So
Yep. So then they have
value's
to
kind of
reduce their
gone down.
price, and then things go on a fire sale, and then eventually it's a going out of business sale. And then
I mean, it makes more sense when you put it that way, but yet the economy feels so much more confusing. But
yeah, there's a fundamental input into that where the economy itself is probably going to produce less, right? And that production is a primary input to what asset prices do. But is that going to be forever? Are some people going to be able to deal with the volatility and then make money on the other side because the economy rebounds and so on and so forth? Those are the questions that the buyers are probably saying, yeah, this is going to be okay.
So you've kind of said the things they have in common in general principles. Is there any divergence between the older crowd and the younger crowd? It's definitely kind of maybe more of a buying opportunity for the...
If you're older and you're not working, the likelihood that you're going to have the ability to generate new income to put into investments is a lot lower.
Which is the dollar cost averaging, bringing down that basis.
It sure, yeah,
Can you clarify both of those things?
sure.
Both what Jared said and what.
If you're 35
That's it.
years old, the likelihood that you have at least another 30 years to work and thereby can take 5 or 10% of your income and put it just into savings, right? Not even into an investment, just into savings. That's a lot of money as compared to the amount of money you have right now. So the consequence of what you do right now as far as investing might be lower. If you're 65 and you've got 2 years of work left and Social Security is coming and you've got a portfolio, your ability to greatly affect what would be your permanent capital, which is what you're hoping to produce an income during your retirement for, is going to be lower, right? Partially because of the jobs you might be able to get at that age, because you're not going to work and you're just going to accept a lower standard of living or whatever it is. But that comes back to risk tolerance. Your time horizon determines part of your risk tolerance. And if you were that age, you probably have a shorter time horizon.
So it's probably more important than if you... Sounds like it's almost that much more important if you were older, that you already had a plan in place that was kind of preparing for these types of things.
It's better that way. It's not a thing to despair about if you didn't, right?
Why would I not despair? I'm looking at my bank account, my investment account, and it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to stay retired?
Well, the number one reason not to despair is then you're almost certainly going to make bad decisions, right? If you're in a despairing mode, the likelihood that you're making good, clear-headed decisions is pretty small. Don't despair. Regardless of what the consequence of the last few weeks has been to the number, in your portfolio, don't despair. Don't get too caught up in that, because you'll likely make worse decisions if you're doing it from a position of despair. Secondly, and I'm not being flippant, but it's a truth that people really need to absorb. You can't do anything about it now, right? The losses are what they are. There can be things that happen in the present and the future to change your outlook, but you literally can't do anything about the stuff that's already happened. So allow yourself to get a clear head on, what do I still have? What does that mean? Both the investments that I have and their outlook, and the amount of money I have and its outlook for me. I think that finally too, you don't despair, because life will go on, regardless of what you've experienced. And I think that I've come across enough people that have had pretty negative investment experiences at times to know your life isn't over, even if you have a 20% drop in your portfolio.
Jack, thanks for being on the show. I think everybody's going to learn a lot. And at this point, it's just nice to be able to hear thoughts from a professional in the industry.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah,
right,
thanks,
thank
Jack.
you.
One thought I had is the next few weeks or month or so, with the social isolation that we're all having more and more are going to have to do, how do we cope with the kind of psychological effect of isolation? What are things that we can do if we're not able to go out and be with friends or family? Like, I just realized yesterday talking to my sister that I have grandparents that are, in their 80s. It's like, I might not see my grandparents for like 3 months or something. I mean, who knows how long this is going to take. Obviously we're, blessed being in the 21st century where we can FaceTime. I can FaceTime them. But there's going to be a psychological impact of not, like, my kids not being able to go see many of their friends. Or I think we need to be thoughtful about that. It's like, obviously the most important stuff is the health stuff. Like, if you're dead, who cares if you're isolated, right? Most of us are going to be okay, but we're going to have to experience this like strange world of being at home for weeks on end.
Yeah, Matt, I've actually been thinking a little bit about the isolation and the, Dr. Rues even talked about telemedicine. So the ability for people to connect still is going to be there. Even Jack talking about the despair, don't be in despair. It really reminded me, earlier when you've said in other episodes, you've talked about focusing on the things you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just something you've learned with your education. And if we focus on the things we can't control, then we kind of then lose our agency and our ability to make change in our life. And that's actually where we can make the most impact.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to isolation, I feel like that's kind of almost the same thing, right? Focusing on what you can control. And this is something you can't control. And that this is something that this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
This seems like a big theme that's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's true for the national economics, the global economics. It's true for if you get sick or if your family members get sick. And some of us are going to suffer, right? There's going to be loss. So this is where, as a general, we're kind of lighthearted people and we try to take the positive outlook, but at the same time, like, people are going to experience, we're talking a lot about money right now. We talked a little bit about health, but there's going to be actual people, obviously. They announced the first death in Kansas, last night.
Wow.
We're in a state of emergency in Missouri and Kansas, which in my lifetime, I don't know that that's ever existed. Maybe on 9/11 they declared that, but it was right national. There's so many bigger things and worse things that could be happening that if that's the only thing I'm dealing with in that moment is being sick and isolated, I don't know. I feel like that's actually going to make me feel almost lucky. But at the same time, like I said, I think just FaceTime and still interacting with people, unless I'm just really sick. And then I'm just going to be reminding myself that just like any other time I've gotten really sick or injured, like, this will pass.
Right.
I think that's my takeaway.
It makes sense. I think you're speaking to stuff we talked about before too, is meaning. Like, one of the, actually, in some sense, a positive side effect of such a crisis is that it really kind of begins to realign what we find meaningful. I mean, because we live such affluent lives in the U.S. and much of the West. there's definitely people who suffer and have challenges. Obviously, there's that everywhere. But when a serious crisis comes, it kind of realigns our sense of meaning. Our whole country's in some level of quarantine, or there's people dying. There's, people losing their life saving. I mean, there's these bigger events that kind of helps put our struggles into a perspective, which actually makes them easier to deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, at least from my point of view, it's sort of like we're all realizing again how little control we have. And so you have to appreciate what you can control.
Any favorite memes? I know I just went from one really serious topic to the next, but I saw Raul sent me my favorite so far.
Yeah.
Which I thought was
Can
interesting.
we pop it up on the screen?
Yeah, it's up right now. We'll just imagine it is. So hilarious. So I feel really bad for people who are suffering. I've even sat and just tried to think about it so I could be more empathetic, and because so far it's not affected me that much, but I know it is affecting other people, and there's great loss, and so this time though I'm I've been preparing for this personally. I was uncomfortable with the market going up and up and up, and so I've been moving to a cash position. So I'm excited. I'm this is a buying opportunity, and then I'm at the same time I'm reminding myself, don't get super excited, in the sense that align my perspective. There's deeper meaning things here. Sure, I might make money. I could also legitimately be one of the 0.2% that dies, and this doesn't even matter, right? And then so I've started thinking do I have beneficiaries on my accounts correctly? Is our stuff set up right? So I'm sitting and jumping back and forth between excitement and then focusing on opportunity and seriousness. I think that's okay. I think people should be encouraged to do that and think about what's going to happen.
Well, I don't have much invested. We have more on real estate. It's kind of what we've done more of. And it's the real estate market's real high. So I have been thinking, I've had a conversation with.
Yeah, you've talked about it in the show. You were looking to buy real estate rental properties. You've done some Airbnb experiences.
Yeah.
Managed some.
Mm-hmm.
So how's that affecting these decisions?
Obviously, our Airbnb, our bookings, we've had one cancellation, which we ended up moving. Yeah. We're not getting any new book. Usually, starting May through September is Kansas City's high season for vacation rentals.
And you'd already be experiencing booking is what your expectation would be?
It's probably still a few weeks out, but I just know they're just not going to materialize.
Unless something changes.
People aren't traveling. And so, we have the ability to ride it out. So, I'm thinking of it also the two sides. One side's this sucks. I was hoping we were going to have a better year this year, which I'm kind of riding that off. I hope we break even at this point.
No, I totally.
But we have the cash saved up that we can ride it out. And the flip side is that in some sense it's going to kill off some competition who have Airbnbs or have short-term rentals or even hotels that aren't managed properly.
Yeah.
It's going to,
being prepared is key here.
So hopefully.
So you're saying it's going to kill the little man.
Well, he is the little man.
I only have one property.
The littler man.
People who don't manage their company well enough. Yeah.
Sure.
So
there's so many people who have over leveraged. They just think, oh, this is going really well. And what could go wrong? And there are people who will literally be out there with 4 or 5 properties, no reserve funds, and then no reserve funds at home. This is their living. They're operating on a very small, sure, across all the properties, they get plenty of money to live. And some of their friends might think, wow, this guy's the smartest person in the world. I assure you, those guys are panicking if this goes on for 6 months. All of a sudden now you just foreclosed on 5 homes.
Yeah. If you're in that situation, you probably can't last 3 months.
Yep.
You got 5, you got 4 mortgages to pay.
Yeah. So that's kind of more what he's talking about. So
revenue.
And same thing with hotels. If but this is going to be true. And this is what Jack was talking about with the GDP. This is going to be true for people who did prepare. Mm-hmm. You better believe me. I was sitting here doing the math. I'm a small business owner, and I'm 2 things are happening to me at once. One, I know my future cash flows are going down. I see it. It's happening. 2, a lot of my expenses don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Third, and this is where it's interesting. I was actually talking to some other small business owners who are people who just have views, employees who kind of feel like businesses should be taking care of people. Everybody should get extra time off. And they're usually talking about big businesses, but cash flows go down, less money, expenses stay, and then it's like, who's paying for this? And so, but I actually have this like, okay, I have a reserve fund. What should I be doing?
Is he talking about paid time off though? Is he talking about paid time off and then you're also spending in the economy?
Yeah. So like people take paid time off. You're actually spending that money. That's taking from your reserve fund. But just what about in the gig economy right now? What if you employ people in retail, or if you employ DJs, that's your company. Like, are you going to pay these guys? They can't work. How long can you pay them? Are you responsible to pay them? But it's just a conundrum that, I don't think people think much about small business owners. And it's really hard to decide, like, what should I do? Like, what is ethical? What is not? Like, am I responsible to pay for somebody who didn't save up paid time off because they used it? What if you don't provide paid time off? It's never been a benefit. Should you be helping people? These are just interesting questions that I don't think people think about.
Can you help people?
Yeah.
Like, do you have the capacity, or is that going to put you under?
Yeah.
Like,
and for me, that's where I was doing that.
Decision.
That's what I meant by doing the math, right? Like, I want to help people. I want to be the generous person. What if this goes on how generous can I be? What if this goes on for 9 months? What if this mutates and happens 3 times in a row? And then I helped people too much and I go under and fail.
Right.
Because I have the reserve fund. I have prepared for this. I'm not losing sleep, except for how long could this go? The unknown aspect. And then how do I react? So I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting. And I'm curious to get your guys' own inputs from your own jobs and like what you expect from your employers, what other people you've talked to have said they kind of expect. Who's responsible here? And even if somebody says the government, which I don't know the order of our episodes that air. I think our debt
government
one has.
Debt was last.
Government debt has aired.
It was previous week.
Right. So then all of a sudden we're like, that's our debt. Like,
right.
Raul, you're the one that like has literally
out.
Changed the way I view this. It's just amazing that I'm like, I own 1/300 million of this debt.
But they're also spending so much on just trying to fix this problem as well. So
that's our debt too.
That's our debt. Exactly.
So what are you guys thinking as far as what's going to happen and should somebody be helping? I mean,
I have a full-time job. I'm self-employed on the side, but so I still have an income, and maybe I'm just comfortable right now where I'm like, I don't know, maybe
that's something to be thankful for.
Right. No, for sure.
I'm assuming the side gigs are pretty much none right now.
Yeah. I mean, nobody will come near me with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Right? 10-inch pole. That's a very short pole.
It's supposed to be a 4-foot pole.
4 foot. Oh, okay.
Yeah, 4 feet. We don't want to get sick here. 4 feet.
Right.
I mean, I think the benefit of this crisis is that it is causing people to think about how do we take care of each other. Because as a business owner, you're not required to pay someone when they're not working, right? Especially if they're hourly or whatever. But we're all in this together. Like, we're all fighting this virus together. So you want to as much as you can, but you also, the employees need to understand that there is a limitation to what businesses can do, whether it's a giant corporation or a little guy. Like, they all have a limitation. Like if my boss says like, hey, how about, hey, I can keep paying you, but our revenue's down. So maybe you have, can I, what if I pay you this?
To work with them?
Yeah. What if I pay you, 20% less? Like, or, I mean, because that's what we need to do to keep the company afloat. It's like, I have to make that sacrifice. My family has to, and I have to rework how I do things, and everyone's got to do that.
Ironically enough, I said, sweet, let's go out to eat. She's like, should we do that? I mean, we're literally it's the day they declared a state of emergency.
Which is funny. We went out to eat last night too. It's like, this is probably the last time we're going to do this.
So that was one of my thoughts, and I started to say that, but the reason I said it was because I said, actually, I plan on keep going out. But I just think it's really important that we actually, now gathering in large groups, we shouldn't be going to sporting events, but as a society, it's almost like, I think there's almost some advice to it. Like, if we shouldn't overreact, don't touch your faces, wash your hands, keep 4 feet from people. You don't necessarily have to engage with people. And even going out to eat, people are going to, those local businesses are going to be doing everything they can to make their place safe right now. Like, Like, I almost feel like I need to go out and keep participating in the economy. And it's like the nicest thing I can do. I'm a healthy young person who isn't going to highly expose people. I've actually decided that I'm going to try to participate in and focus on local businesses that rely on my patronage more than ever. Like, I'm going to get a Bay Boy sandwich in this.
Specialty sandwiches. No, what you're saying is interesting because I find it so hard to care about the stock market. Like, I know people have so many emotions invested in it, and it's sort of like, why is it going down in the first place? Again, I mean, are there cynical people being selfish that are just pulling out the money when it should be, you just leave it alone and let it do what it does? I mean, the whole, we talked about that kind of fear-based, people may be predicting or whatever the case, but if people are pulling money out, why aren't we like looking at those people and say like, hey, we should all be helping each other? Like, why? Instead, they're probably, I don't know, you can't really say they're wealthy or whatever, but you know, there are wealthy people who are probably staying wealthy and they're not being touched by any of this. But I mean, like, we should hold everyone accountable to keep the economy going. Otherwise, like, the economy isn't forever. You should all just put it in savings. Like, I mean, what's the whole point?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question as far as like, how much is too much? There are definitely some, you know, what if I managed $7 trillion and ripped it out of the economy right now? Like, that would drastically crash the market. And even though I could maybe capitalize on that crash, how much could the market bear? But I don't think people are.
And most of the money that's in there is everybody's 401ks and pension plans. So it's not like there's a handful of oligarchs that have all this, that literally it's their money.
Are pensions involved in that, or is it
absolutely, tons of
federal,
pension
state,
money
local pensions,
a lot of the passive funds. But that's where I think that's going to go up and down. Like, I was moving to a cash position because I felt as if it was overpriced and that it was moving into price for perfection. And I personally felt that people were starting to get too greedy.
Well, this has been just a really enlightening conversation in light of all that we're going through together. And so hopefully you guys have learned about some of the financial and the medical stuff about what's going on with the coronavirus. I know I've learned stuff. We're just hoping for the best for you guys, for those that have been sick. We the best for those who have lost loved ones, even throughout the world. And we're going to all fight hard against this virus. So we'll see you guys next time on It's Just Money. Okay?
All this seriousness is depressing.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be.
Well, it's draining. I'll say that though.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah, it's
that's why we're
serious.
doing
We're
the
in a
episode.
serious
It is
thing
a very
going on.
serious thing. Thank you for listening or watching It's Just Money. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please subscribe so you don't miss out.
Also, leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please comment below.
But remember, it's just money.